Do you ever feel like Eeyore? You know, that lovable friend of Winnie the Pooh who feels as if there's a rain cloud over his head most of the time? Sometimes we can get that kind of mindset too, can't we? How's this for an example? You get out of bed. As soon as you get out of bed, you stub your toe on the nightstand. And while hopping around holding your foot and yelling at your spouse for putting that nightstand by the bed, you step on the cat. And when you do that, you stumble into the wall, knocking off your glasses. They fall down and break. And then as you stumble into the wall, you knock the family picture off the wall. When the picture falls, the frame comes apart, the glass shatters, and as you're hopping around, you step on broken glass, cutting your foot. As you try to stop the bleeding pouring out of your big toe, the cat scratches you because you're standing on its tail. And being mad at the cat, you pick up the closest thing within reach and throw it at the fleeing cat. And it is then that you realize that your wife's heirloom porcelain figurine given to her by your mother-in-law is the airborne missile headed toward the cat, which is now long gone and is in no danger of the hurtling piece of antiquity, which is about to become shards and dust. All this happens within the first 30 seconds of waking up. You then think that all the storm clouds in the world are now hanging over your head, don't you? See, life can be full of clouds, but are they always there? Is every day like that? Really? If you're over 50 years old, you have awakened to more than 18,250 days. Did they all begin like the one we just described? I would dare say that they don't. More than likely, most people don't have many days like this in a year's time. So think of it. Yes, we may have seasons that are difficult, but to say that our entire life is so dire and it's so distressed and we're under the clouds of the world every day, I think then that we need to kind of review and change our perspective of our behavior and see that it's not the way that we sometimes perceive it. You see, sometimes we can be our own worst enemies. Destructive behavior, poor decision making, and sinful actions can often bring about difficult times. Samson suffered when he disclosed his source of strength to Delilah. David suffered when he committed adultery with Bathsheba. Ananias and Sapphira lied and died. The writer of Proverbs warns his readers to stay away from certain people. Yet many choose to associate with those types of people, only later to wonder, why are they suffering? You see, sometimes we bring the storm clouds upon ourselves, don't we? But life doesn't have to be that way. Yes, we all face difficulties, but in reality, most, if not all of us, experience more blessings than we do suffering. And for the Christian, that is definitely the case. We are blessed even when we suffer. The Apostle Paul writes, 5 times I received from the Jews 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was spent in the deep. And yet Paul would write in Philippians 4 that he had learned to be content in whatever circumstances that he was in. He also realized the blessing of living for the Savior when he wrote in Galatians 2:20 these words, I've been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live, the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself up for me. You see, Paul realized the importance of his relationship with Jesus. He had learned to be content in all circumstances. So the question is this: what is the answer to living this way? How can we find peace and contentment in our lives? Well, hopefully we can take a few moments this morning and glean a few things as we examine a portion of the life of one of the famous kings of Israel. Possibly the most famous king of all Israel was David. And although David was not Israel's first king, I would dare say that he is the most famous. However, his life was not without sorrow, pain, poor decisions, or sin. Now we can read a lot about David's life in 1st and 2nd Samuel. And from being anointed king to battling and defeating Goliath, from escaping Saul's attempts on his life, to losing a dear friend in Jonathan, to his adultery of Bathsheba, to his wartime successes, we see David's successes as well as his failures. Yet his faithfulness to and his love for God established his role as a faithful servant. When his life was coming near an end, he penned words that expressed his attitude and gratitude towards God. In 2 Samuel 22, verses 1 through 4, David wrote, "And David spoke the words of this song to the Lord in the day that the Lord delivered him from the hand of all his enemies and from the hand of Saul. He said, 'The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer, my God, my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold and my refuge, my Savior. You save me from violence. I call upon the Lord who is worthy to be praised, and I am saved from my enemies.'" In this brief text, David used the word me, my, or I 15 times. This possessive terminology helps us to see how David faced the giants in his life. His relationship with God was not through proxy. He didn't accept his relationship with God based upon someone else's relationship with God. He did not say, "Well, my father Jesse knew God, so I'm good with God." His relationship with God was between him and God. No proxy was involved. You see, he used words to describe his reliance upon God. Words like, "You are my rock, my fortress, my deliverer." These words sound like one who understood battle strategies and what it meant to be in war. Other descriptive terms that he used were shield, stronghold, and refuge. Again, he applied that which he understood and saw how God had been there for him through the years. You see, David faced many giants in his life. Of course, we all are familiar with the literal giant, Goliath. It was this incident with Goliath that introduced us to the shepherd boy who would become king. It was this Philistine warrior who taunted the army of Israel, who caused David to leave concern for his safety behind as he faced this behemoth of a man. Yet it was David's past experiences which helped him face this giant. Listen to this account from 1 Samuel 17:33 through 37. David had seen and heard Goliath taunting, and he volunteered to go and fight the giant. And here's what we read. Then Saul said to David, "You're not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant was tending his father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went out after him and attacked him and rescued it from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. And this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God." And David said, "The Lord, who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." You see, David's recollection of what God had done for him in the past helped him move forward in the present. Do we sometimes get so caught up in the present that we don't know what to do? Do we allow the present to overshadow our past experiences with God? See, David found assurance in facing his giant because God had been with him in the past. That is how we also can find strength. Remembering God's past faithfulness helps us face our present. Now, some might say, well, David was a king. He never experienced any types of trials like I face. Maybe that is correct. But on the flip side, many of us have never faced the types of trials that David dealt with either. You see, David was at times the victim of his trials, and at other times he was the instigator for his trial. Yes, his may be different than ours, but we all face trials. We all have those storm clouds over our heads every now and then like Eeyore, right? Think about it. When Saul was attempting to kill David, and David was on the run invading Saul and his army, David would have been considered a victim in this case, as Saul's jealousy was fueled by his anger and rage. Saul was not only paranoid in his relationship with David, having on more than one occasion the desire to kill David, Saul also threw a javelin at his own son Jonathan because of his anger over Jonathan's allegiance with David. Yes, at times David was the victim. However, at other times, David brought his clouds upon his own head. One of the times, for example, was when he was fleeing from Saul. And he went to Abiathar, the priest of Nob. Now, David wasn't totally honest with Abiathar upon why he was there in Nob. And later, when Saul found out that David had been in Nob, his paranoid mind caused him to think that all the priests of Nob were siding with David over him, when in fact they had made no such decision. And because of Saul's paranoia, he had 85 priests killed. And he also attacked the city, killed men, women, and children there. David would later find out about this, and he would state that those deaths were because of him. His less than truthfulness cost many their lives, and now he would live with that. You see, the storm clouds that Eeyore has hanging over his head remind us of the clouds that were over David's head as well. And sometimes those clouds are over ours. Think about some of these trials that David faced, some of which he brought upon himself. One of his trials that he faced was his dearest friend Jonathan was killed on Mount Gilboa along with Jonathan's father, King Saul. Jonathan and David were close friends, and he mourned his loss. Later, David would go to war with the house of Israel, as there is a divided kingdom with the house of Israel under the reign of the descendants of Saul and the house of Judah under David's rule. Clouds were coming in. Abner, the commander of Saul's army, decides that he will ally himself with David. However, Joab, David's commander, or the commander of David's army, detested Abner because Abner had killed Joab's brother. Joab then kills Abner. And Joab was then reprimanded by David because he felt that Abner was a good man. Another cloudy day for David. David commits adultery with Bathsheba. And after finding out that Bathsheba was pregnant and the failed attempt to get all to think that her husband Uriah was the father of the child, David has Joab place Uriah, Bathsheba's husband, in a dangerous, precarious place in the battle and let him be killed by the opponents. The storms were rolling in, weren't they? Later, Nathan the prophet confronts King David regarding his adulterous affair and informs him that the child that had been born through that sinful act would die, and that there would be turmoil and war and humiliation within his own family because of what he had done. The storm clouds were now raining on David's parade. Amnon, David's son, rapes his half-sister, Tamar, and is later killed by Absalom, Tamar's brother, who was also one of David's sons. Absalom would then conspire against his father and go to war against him. And when Absalom was later killed by Joab, David mourned his son. And it was Joab who then reprimanded the king and told him that his behavior in mourning over Absalom humiliated his soldiers who were willing to die for him. And that if he didn't stop, they would be gone. Oh, again, stormy days for David. See, we can look at many of the events in David's life and see cloudy days, even cloudy seasons, some of which he brought upon himself. And when we do that, we might see that we are, to a certain degree, like David, bringing upon ourselves some of our own trials or storm clouds. Yet in all these things, as David inches towards the end of his life, he is able to give tribute to God by commenting that God was his rock, his fortress, and his deliverer. Can we have that confidence? Can we face our storm clouds with assurance that God will be with us? Can we face our giants and realize that we too can overcome them as David overcame Goliath Can we? Yes, we can. We just need to remember the blessings that God has given to us and not let them be blotted out of our minds by the storm that we might be facing. You see, we need to realize that God's faithfulness in the past is a reminder of His faithfulness in the present. See, David faced quite a few giants, weathered many storms, and his faith remained steadfast because he knew God was faithful. His faith was his own. It wasn't something that someone else owned, but it was personal to him. And if we find that personal type of faith with God through Jesus Christ, then we too can say that God is our rock, our Redeemer, our Savior. When we do, we'll be on the right path. David was confident, and he was confident in God. And that confidence is shown in the words I'm about to share with you. And if we walk with God, if we walk with Christ daily, we too can experience the joy and peace that God gives His people. David penned these now famous words, expressing his reliance, his trust, and his confidence in God. And they are words that we can apply to our lives as well. And they go like this. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.